we lift, we every, we voice and we sing, we till and we till and we till and we earth and we heaven, us ring, we without and we within, the harmonizing harmonies, we of liberty, we let our joys rejoice, we shot and we rise, we stay listening, we blue, we sky, we let it resound, we loud, us loud, we loud as the rolling, we rolling as loud as the seas.
Welcome to another episode of the Woodbury Word. I'm Wood.
And I'm Dre.
And we've got a special guest with us today, Mr. Imari Jeffries.
Hey, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
I go back with this brother a long time. He knew me before I was a grown-up, so to speak. He's a Southern gentleman out of Tennessee, but resides in Boston. He's been working in the nonprofit space for quite some time now and is spearheading a very exciting campaign right now. I'm elated to see this brother's success. Happy to call him a brother and a support system. Present to some and introduce to others, Mr. Imari Jeffries.
Hey, good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for having me this morning. And this could be a whole episode on the Woodbury Chronicles in Boston. So you guys know that Malcolm X spent his youth in Boston. So there's a little story like that for Wayne Woodbury. So that's probably another episode if we want to do a behind the scenes blooper reel. I'm ready for that episode too.
Let's do it.
That's definitely another episode another time. Yeah, man. Why don't you let the folks know what King Boston is and what your involvement in this movement is?
Well, King, I'm really excited about King Boston, which is a new initiative that is launching in Massachusetts. And so one of the things that people don't know is that Dr. and Mrs. King met in Boston during the 50s. And so they were college students. So Boston is the fourth largest college town in the country. The other largest college towns map out population size. So the biggest college town, the largest college town is New York, then LA, then Chicago, then Boston, although Boston's the ninth largest city. And so there are 400,000 students that come to Boston every year to learn and to grow. And the Kings were one of those, or two of those students in the 50s. Dr. King was a doctoral student at Boston University. Mrs. King was at New England Conservatory. And so in Boston, we imagine what it might be if the Kings and Boston as a city was friendly for Black folks in the 50s, and the Kings decided to stay, like many college students do when they go to Boston or other cities for their education. And so if the Kings had stayed in the 50s, what would Boston be as far as being the center of the national civil rights movement? What would Boston be as far as being the center of Black knowledge, economies? What would Boston be as far as racial equity and justice? So we have this opportunity 55 years later to tell that story. Boston's in a different place. And so King Boston started off as a memorial to honor Dr. King, evolved as a memorial to honor Dr. and Mrs. King, and then further evolved to a memorial to also honor Boston's civil rights icons. And so the Embrace, which is a monument 22 stories high, Hank Willis Thomas, who is the nationally renowned sculptor, along with Mass Design, was selected to be the ideas generator, the winners of the Embrace Memorial in Boston Common, America's oldest public park. And so in that time, there were 126 applications or submissions to build a King Memorial in Boston. That team won, and we're excited to not only launch the Embrace, but launch the Center for Economic Justice and Embrace Ideas, which is a festival that is, I would imagine it, liken it to South by Southwest, but about equity. And so it's an Equity South by Southwest festival. We're launching that officially, the festival, in October of 2022. But we recently hired a new director who's kicking off a series of music, culinary, arts experiences that will culminate to the unveiling of the Embrace. So it's a triple threat of work in Boston, a monument in Boston Center, a research center in Boston's Black Heart, Boston's Black community in Roxbury, and an ideas festival, which will launch officially in October of 2022.
Man, it's a lot. It's a lot. But I think what really excites me about it is it brings together so many of the things that we've always talked about that Boston represents. It's sort of this microcosm of sort of the state of things in terms of the historical record of race in America. You've got the fragmented resources in a place that's abundant in resources, and specifically in the Black community and the minority communities in Boston. And the fact that you're able to bring all of these things together under the guise of, not under the guise, but within the realm of this well-known and world-renowned figure of economic actually, and social justice in a space that sort of helped to mold him and his wife. That's what excites me most, that these conversations that we've had for years on end, finally here is a platform to create an institution that can address all of that.
And that's right. And so part of towards the end of Dr. King's life, when he was right before he was assassinated, right before he was murdered, he had expanded his campaigns to expand to poverty alleviation, to eliminate poverty, anti-war, environment, economic justice, a myriad of campaigns. He was assassinated in Memphis, really marching for Memphis sanitation workers. And so in 65, King came back, Dr. and Mrs. King came back for the 1965 Freedom Rally in Boston to march for 4 issues. And those issues in Boston were poverty. We're now framing it as Black and brown wealth, education, racial equity, and housing. And so those were 4 things that were problematic for Black Bostonians in the 60s, and they're still problematic today. And so when we think about imagining Boston and the King Center being positioned in this moment in time, Boston has a history, or at least an external history of racism, anywhere from what was happening in sports and calling sports players the N-word and the iconic picture, which was reminiscent of last Tuesday, of Ted Landsmark getting stabbed by the American flag. And so there's this history in Boston, and some lists, people refer to Boston as one of the most unfriendly, one of the most racist cities in America. And I think Bostonians heard that. And so, little known fact about Boston, Boston is 25% African-American, 25% Black. And so the average large city in America is about 11-12% Black. Boston's 25% Black. Our top law officials, the sheriff, the chief of the Boston Police Department, are African-American male. The district attorney is a Black woman. The mayor in waiting, the current mayor of Boston, was just selected by President Biden's campaign to be the labor secretary. And so the next mayor of Boston will be an African-American woman. The heads of Boston's 3 largest foundations are either Latinx or African-American. And so there's this emergence of BIPOC leadership, BIPOC positioning in economics, in civic leadership, in economic leadership, that has paved the way for King Boston to be successful in 2021 to 2022. And so, King Boston is a byproduct of Boston's changing landscape, instead of the other way around. And so I think Boston's ready for a research institution in its Black community. We're ready for a monument that represents inclusiveness. We're ready for a festival that welcomes people outside of Boston to Boston, and also, one of the top Congress people in the country is Ayanna Pressley, right? And so there's an emergence of Black power and Black authority that when people think about Boston, they just don't think about. And so, I'm excited to be here. If any city can pull this off post-pandemic, my bet's on the hometown.
So I got a question for you because you touched on a couple of topics that are right in line with kind of where my mind was going. Number one, I knew about Dr. King going to Boston University, but I never thought about it in the way it's always been Atlanta. It's always been his legacy is tied to Atlanta. So, that's interesting. And to see, how it could have mapped out is just, I'm excited to see that. But you also talked about the city being ready for it, with the reputation being, anti-Black or anti, people of color. What's your sense within the city, conversations that you're having, engagements that you're having? Are people really ready for it in terms of in their heart, or do they just see this as an opportunity we can make Boston look good? What's that? What are you seeing there?
People in Boston are ready for it, right? And so, it's still a task to win hearts and minds, as we saw, last Tuesday, right, with the storming of the White House, right? There are 70,000 folks plus that voted for President Trump, that feel the way that they do. So hearts and minds is a hard thing to win over. But for the most part, I think Bostonians, we like to think of ourselves, at least historically, as the home of the abolitionist movement, and so it originated in Boston. Reverend Barber, who is out of Charlotte, talks about a third Reconstruction. I think we're in the middle of that third Reconstruction. This uprising in D.C., this emergence of fascist leaders, this emergence of Black elected political power and officials, from anywhere from Georgia with Stacey Abrams and Reverend Warnock, Senator-elect Warnock, to Ayanna Pressley and others in Massachusetts and across the country. And so I think we're in the middle of this third Reconstruction, and I think Bostonians. Boston is a small city that thinks of itself as punching above its weight class. And I think there's ingredients in place, from the higher education to the life sciences to the industry sectors, to a 25% African American community, to a 51% minority BIPOC community. It's on the water. It is, there's all these ingredients in place, that allow us to be posed and poised to be successful. It's not to say that the city is without problems. There was an article a few months ago about Boston's newest neighborhood, the Seaport, which is predominantly white. And so we had an opportunity years and years ago, culminating to today, to create a new neighborhood in Boston. And we created the same old neighborhood we always created. We created an expensive neighborhood that, through de facto redlining of rent, allowed many people of color not to live in the neighborhood, many businesses of color not to even establish themselves there. And so we're not perfect as a city, but I think the King Center is an institute for the time for the city. And I think after the year we've experienced with the viral pandemic, the racial pandemic, the economic pandemic, there'll be an emergence of a number of new NAACP-esque organizations that will emerge across the country. I'm hoping that King Boston is one of those organizations.
Absolutely. Two things I'll say as we sort of close here. Boston is unique in that it's always been on the forefront of research and development. And I think it's appropriately timed that you guys are spearheading this research project so that they can take a real hard, properly supported look at inequities and what the science is behind them. And the science does not necessarily equate to how it was constructed in a lab, but the science meaning there's a theory, there's a process there. And we, those who have studied those inequities and social disparities, understand that there's a science behind the inequities. It's not happenstance. So Boston being a place where that is on the forefront is exciting to me. And I can't wait for the festivals. I need to get back to Boston and get out and be involved in something that's really, really about moving the needle in the right direction, as you say, as we sort of reach this area of this moment of revolution, really.
And the festivals and and music are important, right? Because the anti-racist discourse is always centered around policy. It's always centered around data and research, and that's important. And we have to interrogate the ways that racism manifests itself systemically. But we're also humans, and so our humanity, the arts, symbols, music, those are important parts that make us human beings. And so if we don't engage the humanities, culinary, journalism, TED Talks, music, physical art, mental art, education, into this anti-racist discourse, we're going to continue repeating the same things that we've always done. And so the secondary part of a festival is centered around spatial justice. Spatial justice is important where people can be safe. Those spaces include our homes. Can a Black person be safe in a home? And so when we're redlined or when we're boxed out by rent, that's one way that we can't be safe. Can we be safe in a car? Most of the pre-contextual stops that result in murders or state-sanctioned killings of Black men or Black people by police officers happen at traffic stops, 1/3 of them, as a matter of fact, based on a Harvard study. And so can a Black person be safe in a car? And so this emergence of this Karen phenomenon is really illuminating safety and well-being and joy. And so if we don't include safety, well-being, and joy as a part of anti-racism discourse, we're going to continue to repeat the cycle. So the festival and music is important. And so, we're partying with a purpose, but that purpose is a part of who we are as human beings. And it's an important part of how we transcend in 2021 and beyond.
Absolutely. Brother, as always, appreciate you.
Thank y'all for having me. And let me know. I'm looking forward to coming back to do the Wood Chronicles episode. And Dre, I'm sure there's some Dre Chronicles too. Isn't that the Chronicles?
Right.
We got
we'll have your counterpart for him on as well. Because it's not one-sided.
So, Imari, real quick, before we let you go, we know you have a busy day. Where can people find out more information about the project? Is there any way people can reach out to you if they have questions, or what's that whole engagement perspective look like?
So they could find us on the web. Our website is kingboston.org. They could also find us at Twitter, is at kingboston11, or me at Ask Imari. That's my Twitter handle. And if you're tuning in, we will be streaming throughout the next couple of months 2 films. Legacy of Love, which is a documentary about the King's early times in Boston, and so it will probably be streaming on a local PBS, GBH public television station near you. And for Dr. King's holiday, we're playing Voices on King, which will be streamed at 5:00 on TBS website, or NBC4 in Boston, or NBC 10 in Boston at 7:30. So that's another place that you could find us. Check us out. Check out some of our films that we're putting out, because I think it's important that we see ourselves in different spaces. And these films are both historic and articulate the textured feelings that I think we as BIPOC people, as Black men and as Black folks feel during this time. And so those would be the ways that you could check us out. kingboston.org is definitely the easiest and quickest way.
Oh,
absolutely. Man, we're going to have you back before the Chronicles episode and talk about existing in different spaces. That's one of the things that you and I and our circle talk about constantly. It's one of the things that I deal with intently with my son and his circle and his friends, about being able to exist in spaces safely and confidently. So we're going to have you back to really explore that.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot of literature on spatial justice, and so I think it's an emerging theme that Black folks are paying attention to, and realize it's an important part about our sense of belonging in this country.
That's right. Hey, brother, love you. Appreciate you.
Thank you much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you.
That's it for Dre and I. Until next time, y'all stay safe. Peace.